Hi, everybody. Hello, 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 hello. Hi. Oh, my name is Frank Force. Thank you so much for coming out to Nerd Night and coming out to my talk. So my talk today, the other talks have been about programming. My talk is also about programming. It's about making super tiny programs that do all kinds of cool stuff like art and music and games and stuff like that. So, actually, I think I'm going to carry this. That makes it easier. Oh, that's better. Okay. Yeah, so my name is Frank Force, that is my real name, and I've worked in the video game industry for about 20 years. I got a bachelor's in computer science, and I worked at a lot of different video game studios, and right now I'm actually more focused on doing indie game development and art. So for example, like here's some of the indie games I made. Now these are all made with JavaScript, which is what I'm going to be talking to you about today. And I also do generative art, which is all done with JavaScript as well. And what I'm kind of be talking about today is like a slimmed down version of some of this generative art stuff. Tiny programs. You know, this is like my favorite thing. I discovered it maybe like 5 or so years ago, and I've just been like going down the rabbit hole ever since. And I want to share all my secrets about tiny code with you today. So let's talk about tiny code. So what is tiny code? Like, I mean, what does it even mean? So you might have heard someone earlier mention code golfing, size coding, or minifying, or some other ways to call it. What we're trying to do is just make a super tiny program. Shakespeare said brevity is the soul of wit. And I kind of think of tiny coding as like writing poetry as code. Like, think of it as like code poetry, or a haiku made out of code. So this all kind of started with the Demoscene, which is this this big movement that started happening in the 80s. People had personal computers, and it was especially big in Europe. It's still going on today. People make these super tiny programs that they start at 64 kilobytes, but they can go all the way down to 256 bytes or even like 16 bytes. They have like these huge parties, LAN parties, and project these demos. This was before there was YouTube or anything. So these were like music videos with music and really cool graphics and stuff. Still going on today. So that's how I just give you like a little crash course in some of the basics of code golf. So the idea is, like I said, we're going to make it small as possible. We'll use some programming tricks to make that happen. We're going to eliminate white space. Obviously, no comments. I'm not even going to say that. No single letter variables. Avoid functions. Keep it as simple as you possibly can. And it's also about the algorithm, too. Like, it's not just as I'll show you more, it's not just about the code golf aspect of it, but crafting programs that are just kind of simple and compact. And we had talked earlier about the concept of entropy, and just really tight in that sense. So JavaScript is one of the best languages, I think, for doing tiny coding, because it's an interpreted language. So you can use what's called a live editor, and it's just the most amazing thing. I've been programming for 20 years, and I had never used this before. The way it works is every single thing you type in automatically compiles the program and runs it, and you see the result right away, instantly. So if you change one number, you'll see your program you'll see the result will change right before your eyes. And it's the most amazing instantaneous feedback that like completely changes the whole art of programming, really. And some of these tools have some other features built in, like capturing GIFs and stuff like that, so you can share it on social media and make it easier to work with. You're going to want to share these tiny programs that you make. There are the demo parties that I talked about earlier, where people enter different contests of making tiny programs. There are websites. There's a shader toy that's mostly focused for WebGL shaders. And there's competitions like JS1K, where we're making 1 kilobyte JavaScript programs. And what I'm mostly going to be talking to you about with this talk is a website called Dwitter.net. And it's awesome. So what is Twitter? Well, if you take the words demo and Twitter and you put them together, you get Twitter. That is like kind of the idea of Twitter. And it started in 2016 with an entry to a demo party. And they just made a really great website where people can create user, and you can like post your tweets and comment on tweets. And it's just like this really cool community that is constantly growing. And right now we've got over 20,000 tweets. So when Twitter, if you go to start a new program, you're going to see this as the first thing you'll see. It's what we call the Twitter default. And that's the code there on the left-hand side. Basically, you've got these 9 rectangles, and they move back and forth. It's a very simple kind of program. And Twitter sets up a lot for you, so it kind of makes things easy for you. It creates a canvas automatically where you can draw to. You can draw these recs to. It automatically creates a loop that iterates 60 times per second. So you've got an animation kind of built in. And there are a few shorthand functions like sine, cosine, and tangent, which are simplified to SC and T. But it really is very similar to vanilla JavaScript, which will run in any web browser or your phone or anything. So just to give a quick example of how you might minify that program, how to simplify this code. So on the left-hand side is the actual default code. So you start by doing some programming tricks, and you'll see a lot of this stuff on Twitter, similar concepts. We're going to iterate down instead of iterating up, allows us to save some bytes. Switching how the width works to clear this, that line actually clears the screen. Then you start to make more concessions as you want to really squeeze it down. So you might say there's like normally 100 pixels between each rectangle, so you can change it to be 99 pixels between each rectangle. Now you just save the whole byte of space. So this again, just giving you a quick example of what Twitter, to run any tweet you ever want to run, this is the HTML program where you could paste in your Twitter code and it will run any tweet. It's very close. That's what I love about it is you can use this on any website or anything. So this whole concept of like 9 bars, like you could do way more than that, but I'm just starting out small. We've done all kinds of crazy stuff with just these 9. This is concept here. Here's some of my favorite community ones, and I've done a lot of my own too, with the just. This is the same concept of just 9 bars moving back and forth, and how can we really just like experiment and go crazy with different ideas. So something you might also have to know about for Twitter, you might notice on there, is that Twitter uses characters rather than bytes, which are a little bit different. And when they originally set up Twitter, it was set up to be 140 characters, because that's what Twitter used, and it was supposed to be kind of like Twitter. And so what we discovered is that you can use these Unicode characters, certain special Unicode characters. They're those question marks, and they hold 4 bytes in each Unicode character. And 2 of those bytes can have to be a certain special thing, but 2 other bytes can be whatever you want. And ultimately what it breaks down to is you can store 2-to-1 compression in a tweet. And with the uncompressor itself, it ends up working to be 194 bytes. So it allows us to push, it might not sound a lot, but 54 bytes gives us the extra space to really push things further. So just to see how that works, you kind of just call escape, you replace, you do an unescape, and an eval. This stuff happens, you don't even need to know how it works, so don't be scared by that. You can automatically compress a tweet. You can also use the same concept of the Unicode characters to pack image data, which I've done to make a Mona Duitza, and I made my self-portrait here, and I've also made Link from Link to the Past. So let's talk about tiny graphics and just kind of get an idea of how this whole API works, of like the kind of stuff you're doing. So you'll be using the JavaScript 2D canvas, and it's a really great API, very simple. You can do geometric shapes, you can draw text, you can change the color of things, and draw outlines, and that's really everything. There's a couple other like bonus features like shadow effects and stuff like that, but most of what you see is really just squares, circles, and of different colors, and maybe emojis. So for example, let's say you want to draw some geometric shapes or whatever you can do with the API. You've got fill rect, clear rect, you have a fill style, that's how you set the color, and pretty much all the functions you see here, this is everything you're going to do on Twitter. Everything you've seen in this entire presentation is composed with probably those small set of drawing functions. So some of the things I've done, like some books, or a brick is kind of like a stack of rectangles, if you can imagine. And you can do other there are other ways to do graphics on Twitter. Like you can use HTML. If you've ever seen an HTML table, you can add color to it and play around with that. There's CSS, which is everyone hates CSS, I think. But you can actually use CSS to make art, and we do that too. You can use SVGs. Mostly we use the canvas though. So one of the very first things that you're gonna need to know is about random number generation. And it sounds like one of these really mathematical things. I didn't know anything about it really. Like you kind of get a function like math random that gives you a random number between 0 and 1, and that's kind of where most programmers end with it. But there's a lot more that you're going to want to do on Twitter. For example, like a seeded random number. That's where you're going to get the exact same output every time, but it still kind of seems random. One really great way to do that, for example, is to call sine of a number squared. Like that simple concept of just the sine function is just a great way to get random stuff. But just lots of different ways of doing the same kind of thing and different side effects you can get from it. There are just so many amazing algorithms that you can do with Twitter, and these are the kind of things we're going to be talking about. So I'm going to keep going. Tiny Arcade, yeah, we can make games on Twitter. I've done a whole bunch of different types of games. Wolfenstein is one of the crazier ones. Baseball, stuff like that. It is a bit tricky to do games on Twitter because you have to get input from the user, and that itself takes up a whole bunch of space. The smallest way is just an on-click event, but if you want to get like mouse input or you like the actual position of the mouse, you can do that too. You can even get gamepad input with a pretty small space. So if you wanted to make Flappy Bird that fits in a tweet, it would look something like this. That's HTML and everything. You can just pop that into a web browser and it'll work. So I don't really have time to step through each one of these, but this is the kind of stuff that you can find out there that will break down how each line of code works, and it's kind of fun to learn how it works and experiment with it and just play around with this concept. You can also do sound in tweets. We've messed around with it quite a bit. Though, again, like for the same reason as games, the audio part of it takes up a lot of code, which means that the actual like music part of it, there's not much left to decide what to play. So we've tried though. You can use oscillator nodes. You can where your control like pitches and stuff. You can also use a audio buffer node where you can actually just fill up the samples and play whatever you want. We use something called byte beat music on there. And you can even use the speech synthesis API in JavaScript, which is like you pass in text and it reads out the text, but you can control the pitch and the volume of the text and kind of make rudimentary music. So let's get into some tweets that really inspired me to get into this whole thing in the first place. This is one of my favorite ones by Pavel, one of the great tweeters of all time. You can kind of see like how the amazing simplicity of this underwater cavern and how just kind of cool this form of art is. I think this one kind of shows off what I'm talking about. Coming from a different direction, this raycasting one I saw, and I was just blown away because there's hardly any code there, it seems like. But like having so many things going on is just insane. Definitely not going to walk through how it works, though. Quarantine Door by Yanni. Well, here's another concept altogether where it's more of like an illustrative, it's almost like a movie poster or something, just kind of a cool, creepy concept. And here's one that's a flying paper airplane. And this one, it creates a function, a line2 function, and then this f function, and it just calls it a whole bunch of times. And it's pretty cool. Here's one that really blew my mind. That is city traffic simulation, and if you could see the tiny little cars in there moving around and bumping into each other, I think it's pretty amazing. Here's another one. This one is a 3D structure that has a smoky effect using this shadow blur I was talking about. like using these kind of extra effects, you can create all kinds of cool stuff. There's a guy on there, Top Link, who releases all kinds of like interesting abstract art pieces, and I think he's done about 1,000 of these, just all kinds of cool stuff. Always like to see what he's doing. So let's get into some of the ones I've done. I'm going to show you my very first tweet. Just kind of like I found out about this website, and I was like, I gotta get into this. So I made this one, and it's pretty basic, nothing mind blowing, but just to get you just to have you understand that like everyone has to start somewhere. You just have to post something on there and get started. So I've been at this for quite a while, for over 5 years. I've done over 1,000 of these. So yeah. I'm gonna go through kind of some of my favorite ones that I've done. There's so many different like themes, I guess, in the stuff I've released. For space, for example, is one of my favorite ones. There's lots of things you can do, like planets or solar systems, whatever, black holes. So for this like a black hole, I actually have a lot of this stuff is explained on my website how it works. But this one, it's kind of almost all the tweets you'll see work the same way, where it's like a for loop, then you set a color, then you do a whole bunch of fill racks. Each one of those fill racks in this case is one of those little stars. And it iterates coming up from the bottom, from red to white, spiraling out. In this case, there's an I question mark before a bunch of those, because the first thing through the iteration is going to draw a big black square in the background. Normally the background is white. You can even do fractals in a tweet. We've done all kinds of fractal stuff. Here's like a tiny Mandelbrot fractal. This one uses a technique of drawing 1 pixel at a time to create a high resolution image. You can also do cellular automata, which have like all kinds of cool things you can do, such as water or fire or smoke, or like more mathematical type effects. So here's like a Sierpinski triangle that's done with a cellular automata. And I don't know, I really like cellular automata. We've done all kinds of crazy stuff with that. Tiny cities are one of my favorite subjects of all. I did like the top left is a full city with ray casting and has textures and everything. Really proud of that one. But I've done other kind of isometric ones, and more like this one here, which is just like a 2D city. And I have actually a YouTube video that walks through exactly how this one works. But it's, like you said, many of these ones are the same way: fill style, fill rect, and a loop. And it's kind of just drawing these buildings. Each building is pretty much the same, but the windows are randomized. And it's just like a bunch of black and colored squares, and it kind of just staggers them and slowly moves down and down the canvas. And the color, the background is drawn in the very first frame, like many of the tweets. You can do ray casting in a tweet. Done all kinds of crazy stuff with ray casting, including more Minecraft type stuff, or Wolfenstein type stuff, or we can fit shadows. I fit a VHS type of effect. Here's a super high resolution city. It takes a while to draw, but just to give you an impression of some of the kinds of things you could fit in a tweet. Here's one of the treescapes I've done. I think nature is kind of a really inspiring thing for all artists, but especially on Twitter, because it's always like hard to get that nature with such small amounts of code to make it feel like organic. This one we on Twitter, so you can remix code on Twitter. So I originally posted this one on Twitter as a 194 character compressed tweet. And then people like remixed it and stuff. And after we remixed it a whole bunch of times, we eventually got it down to 119 bytes. So asemic writing is a really cool and weird thing. I had never heard of it, but essentially the idea is you have like writing that looks like real writing, but it is not. It doesn't mean anything. It's just gibberish, like a prescription or something, I guess. So I mess around with that a lot too. And here's just like kind of an example of a super small program to do just a kind of a little scribbly writing thing. You can even do tiny people in a tweet. I've done them a lot with that. So for example, you really need to think about the algorithm of what are you making, what are you trying to make? In this case, we're making a person, so there's a very specific way I decided to do it. And that's, each limb is a separate line. So you start with the top of the head, and you draw a head, shoulder, elbow, hand, and then you do the other arm the same way, but just offset. And the legs are drawn the same way too, but just longer and kind of flipped around backwards. It took a while to kind of work that out, though. Doing landscapes and stuff is really fun. Mountains and kind of just like these landscapes. Here's like one with more of a crayon kind of drawing effect. So I'm just going to go with rapid fire through a few more of my tweets towards the end of the presentation here. Optical illusions, like pretty much any optical illusion you could probably fit in a tweet. Chaotic systems are really fun to play around with because they're kind of unpredictable, and it's kind of surprising to see what they're going to give you. Different kinds of physical simulations like water or bouncing or organic type stuff, particles, fireworks. All different kinds of trees. Like these are all drawn completely differently. Like whether it be a bamboo tree or a 3D tree or palm tree. Geometric and mathematical inspired designs, tunnels. We've seen a lot of tunnels, and this is kind of like a cool thing you can do. I've done a whole bunch of these ones that are like a word and then like doing something weird with that word because I just thought it was like a fun, silly thing to do, and I've done a whole bunch of these. And many, many more. I've done over 1,000 of these, so it was hard to even just cut it down to this. But I've done a carrot. I've done like the Eiffel Tower. So, it's like for me, it's kind of a really fun hobby. I just kind of chip away at it. Oh, I threw this one in for that guy earlier. His FizzBuzz. All right, final thoughts. Let's wrap it up here. So we've done this whole talk. Hopefully everyone is interested in writing tiny code. I personally find it fun and relaxing to do. It's kind of a chill thing to do while you can even be watching TV or whatever, or playing with your kids or working on something else, and just kind of you get an idea for how to save a few more bytes and work on it. You will get better at programming by doing this, and rapid prototyping too. And there's also a community you can be part of, and you can enter these challenges if you want, or just do it for fun. You might think like, why does this even make sense in the context of modern programming? But I actually think there's a huge bright future for tiny code because we're actually inventing new kind of techniques all the time. And JavaScript is a language that's constantly evolving and getting new features. As computers get faster, we can do more crazier tweets that do more complex, higher resolution stuff. And AI programming is a thing now. And that can actually help you understand how tweets work and write them. So I think a lot of people here could probably write tiny code if you wanted to. So I'm going to challenge you all to join the tiny code movement by writing your own little tiny program and posting it on social media with #tinycode. And I think I'm just going to wrap it up there. Though there will be a Q&A. I have to say thank you all for watching and for sitting through my talk. It's been wonderful. I hope that inspires you to try some tiny coding of your own. Follow me, Killed by a Pixel, and on Twitter. And if you have any questions, let's hear them.
All right, that was amazing. That was really cool. 87 slides, people. This is a Nerd Night record. All right, who has the first question?
First of all, I just want to say, as a programmer, you are an artist, so that's incredible, your work.
Thank you.
I have kind of maybe two questions, which is one, do you start with the visual, what you want to make, and then figure out code that will make that? Or do you start with code and sort of the art emerges from it? And maybe kind of a follow-up to that, it seems like there's kind of a grammar or a syntax that creates this kind of art style, like beyond just the building blocks of the syntax of JavaScript itself. You mentioned like Phil Recht. It seems this community has discovered its own kind of grammar that produces useful things and makes art. And I'm curious if you have thoughts on like what it is about, say, like Phil Recht or other basic building blocks that let you build up such incredible things.
What was the first question again?
Do you start with the art or the code?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Got it. Yeah. So that is a really good question, actually. Well, it kind of feeds into itself, right? Especially when you have a website like Twitter and you're releasing so much of it. Like you get, so for example, you get you'll see something. You'll see maybe whether it be an animation or an idea or a tree or whatever, and you think, oh, maybe I'll have an idea to code that. So you code it up, and then you finally get it working. And then, but that code itself maybe gives you an idea for something else, just the code it does, because you're like, oh, that's a cool algorithm. Maybe if I like change these numbers around, instead of looking like a tree, it will look like, I don't know, some type of like a cactus or something different. I don't know. But you get like new ideas from like the algorithms, and as we discover new techniques, they kind of inspire us to do new ideas because we kind of see new things are possible. And as for the grammar, I mean, yeah, the thing of it is there are so many different algorithms and they're so different from each other that there are within those algorithms grammars. I tried to show some of that. Like if you saw like the tunnel slide I showed, so if you see some of them use kind of like a similar way of doing things. Like, okay, so these tunnels are very similar in the way they're coded, and they probably do use what you might think of like that. But then there are so many other things that work in completely different ways. Like you have a spirograph, which is, everyone knows how a spirograph works, but to actually program a spirograph is a very specific way of doing it. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting to think about, and also like as far as whether AI or whatever could be used to generate new by looking at all the code that's there. Any more questions?
Yes.
Hi, I think I actually have the same question again as I asked before. So when you create these really small and compact and efficient pieces of code, do you start with like a much longer piece and then figure out how you can make it short? Or do you kind of have an idea for this would be a really short thing to do and start from the brevity? Like where do you start?
Yeah. Well, you kind of get a feel for what might be possible, especially once you just see a lot of stuff. But yeah, you don't start small. I mean, usually what I would start is with plenty of space, spaced out. You can use comments, or you'll have different bits of code commented out that are like, this is slightly smaller, doing something slightly different. And you just write it out long form, like write it out as long as you need it to be, and then you just start hacking it down. It's kind of like the way you do it. Though sometimes if you are remixing something usually, or you're starting with something that's already small, you might just work it from there. But even then, a lot of times when I'm looking at someone else's tweet or whatever, I need to like completely reverse engineer it and like expand it out, make the variable names longer and stuff so I can even understand it. Then I re-minify it all again afterwards. Next question?
All right, last question.
So if you're starting with longer code, do you develop a sense for like what kinds of things you can get to be small enough? Or do you sometimes come up with something and you just like, you find that there's just no way to get it down to the size that you're looking for?
I mean, you get a sense, but I'm always surprised with what's possible and why we keep trying to impress each other with what is possible with the Demoscene and all of that. But you do, like, there's like a certain limit. Like we don't have a language where you can just put one character in and it suddenly generates a tree. Like you do have to, there's a minimum size there that things have to be. So you do gotta get a feel for what's possible. But at the same time, like when I showed you my first tweet, like that's what I thought was possible for me. But I was able to just keep working on it and pushing it and making new ideas. And we don't know what's possible, We're still coming up with new stuff.
Super cool stuff.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.